All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Talking TSR. I am your co-host, Chris, and to my virtual right is Rick. Hey, Rick, how's it going?
I'm doing good. How are you, my friend?
Doing excellent, excellent. Lots of stuff going on today and everything. We got another great episode for you coming at you guys tonight. The first thing, so let's see. We have to give kind of the update and everything. So you just got your second vaccination
Yes,
today.
I'm good.
Congratulations. One
So
more
far,
step
so
closer
good.
to normalcy.
Yeah, I'm not swooning out of my seat yet. No, I'm happy. I'm a happy camper. One more step to the road of normalcy. So,
Yeah, could it be too much for that? I got my first shot about a week and a half ago. So in 2 more weeks, I get 2 week and a half. I get my second shot. So I'm looking at like the beginning of June to be able to, without guilt or without risk or anything, going to a game store and
yeah,
actually like
yeah,
walking through and probably spending more money than I want to.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. I feel like all these things that I miss in person, the D&D, board gaming around the table, these things, it could be a good summer if
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
That
looking forward to it.
I hear you. I think it's going to be really awesome and lots of other things going on. Most people I think know by this point. Hopefully, you guys know that I'm a Star Wars junkie. So I got a very big galactic holiday coming up this Tuesday, May the 4th. We got some new TV shows dropping on Disney Plus, so I'm very excited about that. You're not so much a Star Wars fan, right?
I'm like equal,
Yeah,
it's kind of like that's my nature. I love cats and dogs equally, and I'm like, I love Star Trek and I love Star Wars. I love both. I mean,
gotcha.
seeing the first Star Wars movie in the theater, because I'm an old timer, was a very, mind blowing experience for me. Very memorable. I saw the original 13 times in the theater, so I'm a little
Wow.
bit of a Star Wars fan.
Yeah, I'm a fan. Never saw the original in the theater until the extended editions or the whatever the special editions came out in '97.
Ah,
I actually saw them out of order too, so I really kind of screwed it all up. So I
oh
did
my
see Return of
goodness.
the Jedi in the theater. I did see that one. So, but for such a big
Nice.
fan, but then after that, I kind of consumed everything Star Wars, and then got my first break working on the Star Wars
Hmm.
RPG. So Star Wars has been a huge part of my life. I love it. I love to consume it, and it's just in all of its various forms. So here's another thing that's kind of exciting in my not exciting in my life. It makes it sound like I've got a terribly boring life, actually. But are you a Mystery Science Theater 3000 fan?
That
Yes? No?
I don't watch it regularly, but I have watched it. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, did you watch it back in the day? Back when it was on Comedy
Yeah, I
Central and
probably watched it more back in the day than I do now on Pluto or wherever they show it now.
yeah.
So,
Well, they got a Kickstarter right now, and they're actually funding yet more episodes. So
ah,
I'm very excited about that. And they've been doing live streams. It's also interesting too, since we've been running some Kickstarters at Goodman
mhm,
Games, to watch how other people are running Kickstarters and that, and seeing that they basically have a live stream almost every single night the last week, and it's helping. I mean, it's building the buzz and it's building the
mhm,
interest and everything. So it's fascinating to actually kind of watch somebody else
yeah,
kind of put their Kickstarter together. And obviously, it's a much different scale than the Kickstarters that we do. They're in millions of dollars, where we're in thousands of dollars.
mhm.
But yeah, so I'm also a huge MST3K fan, and excited that there's going to be a new iteration, and they're doing some new cool different things, and it's good. It's good to see them changing and kind
Mhm.
of evolving
Yeah,
as is needed to do in a changing world. So I think that's great. So and
cool.
then lately I've been working on the Lost Level for Crypt of the Devil Lich, which you of course were a participant of. I finally got all of my rooms in this late last week. And this weekend was the fun part, where I actually was laying the maps out on the floor and trying to put the level together. And let me say, everybody decided to make really big rooms or long rooms, and you know what that's all about. So I
Yeah.
have a little bit of trouble fitting them all on a page. But yeah, so it's been kind of exciting to actually do that process and everything, and build a dungeon a kind of a completely different way
Mhm.
than you would normally build a dungeon in so many different ways. So it's kind of fascinating process to go through and everything. But love it that I have 8 different authors, and to see all the different ideas, and then to try
Oh,
and figure
yeah.
out how they're all going to kind of work
Yeah.
together and that. So that's pretty exciting. So, but today we are going to talk about another classic TSR module,
Yeah.
S4. The Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth,
The
I think it is.
Tsojcanth is what, yeah.
Tsojcanth. Yes, that's it. I'll let you pronounce it and everything. So number 22 on the all-time list, the top 30 list of Dungeon Magazine adventures that was published, like I said, back in the day, probably almost 15 years old now,
Wow.
if not more. And another classic module by Gary Gygax. And why don't you give us a thumbnail, Rick? What do
Sure.
you think about this classic?
Um, I would file this as another module that is greater than the sum of its parts. But there's a lot going on there. I think this is one of these modules. I think at first glance, it's easy to look at it and say, well, it's a bunch of monsters and caves, and there is
Mhm.
a lot of that. But there's so many other things going on in this module. I like the little touches of magic. I love the little weird other areas like the labyrinth that we'll get to and such. Fabulous wilderness area. Obviously, we can't go by without talking about the monster book. There's just so many added properties. But yeah, just starting with the wilderness, I love the whole wilderness aspect of this. You're
Mhm.
you're given information, you're given all these little vales and valleys, and it's just so refreshing because you're so used to just kind of starting at the door of the dungeon with so many of these old modules. You're just there. And you really have to work just to find the dungeon in this case. The characters could easily spend a session of playing and not even walk through the front door of the dungeon, just going through the veils. And there's a lot of room there for the DM to kind of play in that sandbox. So you're told the dungeon is somewhere in this expanse, and then the characters have to start rooting around. And I like that. I like the descriptions, and you kind of you get the usual DM map and the player map, and I love those wilderness maps. So it's just that aspect alone for me, it makes it a keeper. The wilderness thing, I think, is just a great way to preface the module,
Yeah.
to load you into the dungeon.
I think that's really what does set it apart from, I guess, two other examples, and I'll use these examples because Master Gygax wrote them also, but B2 and
Mhm.
D1 and D2, Descent into the Depths of the Earth. I mean, they're essentially collections of caves with an impossible amount of monsters and humanoids living on top of each other that doesn't make sense. So again, and this one it's more of the same. It's
Mhm.
higher level obviously than B2, more in line with like D1, D2. But that difference is that wilderness part. And, we saw a glimpse of it in B2, where
Yeah.
he gave us those scant 4 little locations
Yep.
and we wanted more. And some of them, and I kind of equate the wilderness encounters in this one being very similar to those 4.
Mhm.
He basically took that and he kind of expanded on it. He made it a grander scale because there was more travel involved. It was really, I
Yeah.
mean, was it the first wilderness crawl? I kind of think it was. I think this one was before. I don't know about the timing exactly.
Yeah.
If Isle of Dread was before this one or that, or
Yeah.
they're around the same time. So that really, in my opinion, was says like you said, finding the dungeon. It's called the Lost Caverns for a reason. You had to actually find the
Yeah.
dungeon
Yeah.
first, and that wasn't actually easy. And I think that's what really makes this one a little bit different because once you get down to that, okay, now it's a bunch of caves.
Mhm.
It's a little bit. It's a little samey. It's here's more
Mhm.
caves. Here's another creature, etc., etc.
Yeah. And you're right. The creatures are certainly within close way. You've got demons sort of lounging next door to a Dracolisk and this kind of stuff.
And then cave crickets, one room over.
Yeah,
So
and then a few and yet I enjoyed a lot of the encounters. And it's hard. I love the maps. I think 4
mhm,
cave maps, especially the upper caverns. I think the map layout with the kind of the river or whatever and
mhm,
everything. You've got the situation with the boat carrying you through, and it's really hard actually. The module's almost designed both the upper and lower caverns to sort of force the adventurers to really explore the majority of the caverns to
yeah,
proceed. It's not that easy to find the stairs going down, frankly, to the second level kind of thing. It's like, you really, in my experience, characters really have to root around quite a bit in the upper caverns to find the lower caverns or the greater caverns.
mhm,
Um, so I thought that's an interesting kind of design point. Um,
yeah.
I
And
really like that. Um, And later we'll talk about our top monsters because you have such a great added value book in there.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and some of those wilderness encounters had a scant amount of detail, much like
Mhm,
B2, and then some of them had a little bit more detail. And I think the classic one on that is the gnome lair or the
mhm,
gnome veil.
mm,
And I remember when I was younger, probably running through this in the very first time, it was like I was kind of perplexed why that the gnome veil was even included
mhm,
in this, because it wasn't a place you could go and beat up the gnomes. And then, you know, after a while, I kind of go, oh, okay, this is kind of the safe haven where you can kind of go
mhm,
back. And then if you read you know, back when I was a kid, you know, I didn't tend to read everything all the way through. And then you read like, oh yeah, it's like even says that you know
mhm,
that they'll use their scroll of raise dead on you or whatever in case if you become friendly with them. You know, one of the things I think I thought was lacking was I would have liked a little bit more meat there with the gnomes,
mhm,
like how you could prove that you're good, like, you
mhm,
know, that you know, like almost like, you know, okay, here, go do a little quest for us or something like that, and then, you know, then we'll invite you into our home, and then you can use us
mhm.
as a launching point and everything. I think that would have been a little bit more useful, but again, we are talking back like 1981 here. I think it was the year this was published, or you know, and it was, I know it was originally written in the 70s.
Yeah,
Another
no,
one
I
of
think
those
you're right.
classic
81 or
tournament
82
modules.
sounds right. So,
Yeah. It is a little bit, you know, they were obviously doing things for the first time, but and then, you know, there's a lot of different material in there. And again, and this
yeah,
is like a double size module. We're going to get to that in a
yeah,
second. That whole second book that was in there, which was really, again, in my opinion, what kind of brings this one over to, yeah, this is amazing. That whole second book that you got, which was
yeah,
we talked about it on our last show. It's like the first thing I did when I buy a module, I'd always go look at the new
yeah,
monster section
yeah.
before the encounters, before the plot, before
Mhm.
anything. This gave you a whole freaking book,
Yeah,
and it was
yeah,
almost all monsters. And
yeah.
so when we were
And good
prepping for this
monsters.
show, yeah, amazingly good monsters. We were prepping for
Yeah.
the show. You know, I was like, hey, Rick, I think we can do a top list just
Mhm.
of monsters. And he's like, no, we can't. And it's like, we pull out the book and it's like, there's like 30 plus new monsters in there that new for the day. And it was like, you know, some of them not even used in the module.
Yeah.
So that was great. I mean, that was gold right there. It was like
Mhm.
almost if you didn't even use the adventure, you pulled those monsters, because by
Yeah,
that point,
yeah.
you know, you'd gone through that whole monster manual at that point,
Yeah,
you know.
no, it really felt like a sort of preview of the Monster Manual too. You got
Yep.
this little,
Yeah.
bottle size edition of the Monster Manual too, and a nice little booklet, plus other stuff. Um, uh, one of the things that I really like about the booklet is it short of the DMG, it's one of the first times that Gygax really lays out an artifact in detail
Yep.
and takes Daowit's wondrous lanthorn, and he really describes in excruciating detail, but I like it, all the properties and how it's recharged and the ins and outs, and really makes an interesting, powerful item that still has drawbacks where it's not,
Hmm.
unlimited in power or charges, and yet when fueled properly, etc., then it's absolutely effective.
Yeah.
Um, so I just thought it was a wonderful artifact example. As a DM, the DMG was helpful, but getting that really helped me in the future with other artifacts. Looking at that example,
Hmm.
I thought it was a super well done artifact.
Yeah. I think that was definitely one of Gygax's best traits, if you will, as a game designer, balancing things. I mean, if you
Mhm.
looked at those original tables of the character class progression and everything, they just oozed balancing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you might not have understood it back when you were a, you know, a teenage kid playing the game for the
Mhm.
first time. Like, why does it take this many experience points for a paladin versus
Mhm.
a thief back then? But there was a reason, there was a rhyme or reason for
Yeah.
that. And exactly what you just mentioned there with the drawbacks of the artifact is so key. I mean, he was brilliant at that. I mean, I remember in the to jump back down in Underdark and that when you know, when he first had the drow and they all had essentially magic items. They
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
carried +1 to +5 swords and
Yeah.
bows and everything. And you know, come on, our whole party was equipped with all that
Yeah.
stuff. But then he threw that little line in there. As
Yeah.
soon as they hit the sunlight,
Yeah.
they're destroyed.
Yeah.
So it's like you can have these fun things, while you're down in the Underdark, but then
Yeah.
as soon as you leave the Underdark, you're done. And you see that a lot of times where
Yeah.
there was that little drawback or something
Well, sort of
that made
cutting off
something crazy.
trouble before it occurred. It was
Yep.
basically him. And like you said, even in the rules in different places, I remember only after I think playing D&D for a while did I really understand the progression of the characters, and I realized the differences. You
Yeah.
came to learn that magic users were excruciatingly weak in the beginning, but then could really kick butt when
Hmm.
they got higher in level. Whereas some of the other character classes were very even, had a very even progression where they were
Yeah.
just sort of like, much more stair-steppy and just slow incremental powers, where magic users, you had to struggle to stay alive first through third level because you only had a couple spells. There was none of this at will stuff. And then, but if you could get a character up to, eighth or higher level, the fun you could have. And there was a beauty in that, seeing that
Yeah.
some characters were made to start out weak, some were made to start out strong, some were uniform. Like you said, it was the strength of his.
Without a doubt.
And
Without a
it
doubt.
showed. I mean, certainly he was not one to let his characters get too powerful.
Yeah.
um but it didn't, again, with in this example, it doesn't feel unfair in any way. I feel like the lanthorn is completely balanced
Hmm.
as an item, and well designed. I would feel happy if I could design an artifact that well detailed and balanced. So
Hmm. Hmm.
um
Agreed. And some of the other things that extra booklet had that I always remembered and always kind of went back to. I remember using it in most of my games actually. The gem special properties table
yeah. Yeah.
from the back of the book, and it was cool. It was like a couple of paragraphs, and it wasn't even any rules. It was
Hmm.
really like Gygax did so well. And I think we're going to get into this in our next show when we talk about it a little bit more, but he would just give you that little bit and say, now go run with it,
Hmm.
and it's like, I'm going to say gems have special properties, and I'm going to give you a couple little buzzwords kind of thing, in bullet points, if you will, and go for it. Enjoy,
Yeah.
have fun, go design some magic items based on it, or do something with gems and everything. I just, that was, I love that. I mean, that was just, and again, back in the day, I didn't
Yeah.
realize what he was doing. I didn't
Hmm.
realize that this was really encouraging me to then, basically become a game designer before I ever was a game designer. Everybody was
Yeah.
asking me, when did I become a game
Yeah.
designer? It's like, wow, I think as soon as you get behind the DM screen,
Hmm.
you're a game designer, basically. As soon
Yeah.
as you tweak that first encounter, as soon as you start changing something up and everything, you're a game designer. And I
Yeah.
think that's why role-playing games are so enduring to
Mhm.
to us, because you have that ability, that power to actually, be the arbiter of the rules.
Yeah. But it's true, just seeing those properties made you think in terms of, well, if a magic item had this gemstone, then it might do this, and it gets your mind working. And frankly, at the time I was reading this book originally, I mean, now I've done enough game design work and whatever that I know my gemstone. I don't think you can write too much of this stuff and not learn your gemstones at some point. But at the time, I didn't know what a lot of these materials and gemstones even were. I remember, reading about the materials of the steps of the Tomb of Horrors in that one room, and there's different, and you'd hear it's made out of blank, and I'd say, what? Because I knew rubies and emeralds and a few, you know, but once you started getting into a little more obscure gemstones and things, I didn't know what color these things were or what the properties were. And it really, I remember picking up a like little handbook. It was supposed to be like a geologist field guide, to gemstones, something that they would throw in their backpack and take with them, and back in the day with their hammer and chisel and whatever else. I remember getting my hands on one of these little, books, and it was not meant for D&D, but it became a valued resource because it
Mhm.
detailed and had pictures of all the gems and minerals and things. And, stuff like this that Gygax would provide got me curious about that and made me want to use, unusual gemstones in my treasures and mix things up and not just have everything be gold and silver pieces. And like you said, it's just good detail. It's logs for the fire of imagination. So
Yeah. No,
um
definitely.
and
Um,
of course, there's the book has this section of spells, and I found it interesting because they're all I think they're pretty much all extra planar. They're all pretty
mhm.
much all about controlling demons and devils, and with the accompanying diagrams. And even back in the day when I remember looking at this, this booklet and looking at these magic circle pictures, I remember thinking, if there was going to be one of these chick booklet scare type things over a D&D product, like this was going to be the book. It's going to
Probably
do it.
was.
Because you're seeing these details about spells about controlling extra planar beings, and then
Yep.
hear these diagrams of all these pentagrams and such. And
How you draw it.
I remember thinking, this is going to give the wrong person material here,
And that was right in that time frame too. 81, 82
Yeah.
was when
Yeah.
it was all going down.
Yeah, and you had
all
what?
happening.
You had the chick booklet, and you had, what was it, Bad or whatever it was, or Bothered About Dungeons and
Dungeons
Dragons.
Dragons. Yep.
And yeah, it was
Yeah, it was
people
that
laugh
was
about it now, but at the time it was like, the whole
yeah.
mazes and monsters thing,
Oh yeah, and I can imagine, which I just rewatched not too long ago, by the way. It's on Amazon Prime.
Oh wow.
Really was not that bad of a movie, to be honest with you. Young Tom
Wasn't Tom
Hanks.
Hanks in that?
Tom Hanks was in it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
a
telling you,
very
it
young
really.
Tom Hanks.
It wasn't bad, and I'm telling you, wow, we're getting sidetracked here. We did a whole episode on this movie. But the ending was a gut punch. I mean, the ending, I did not remember the ending, but it was really a sad ending. It's like it really was. But anyway, we totally digress on that. We were going down the rabbit hole there, but again, yeah, movie it was not terrible. I wanted to watch it just because I was like, you know what, I need to watch it. I hadn't seen this in 40 years, and I was like, for a made for TV movie, again, not awful in my opinion. They actually did some character development and stuff like that. So anyway, and again, bringing it full circle, I've watched a lot of bad movies. Being a Mystery Science Theater fan, I know what a bad movie is these days. And a lot of times I'll watch something and I'll be like, whew, yeah, that's bad. Just a few weeks ago, I watched Hawk the Slayer for the first time, a classic D&D, swords and sorcery from the 80s movie. And it's like, yeah, I got done with that and I was like, yeah, that was pretty bad. It's like Jack Palance couldn't save that one. Okay, but tune in for our movie review episode of Talking TSR. And
there you go.
Coming to you soon. That'd be a good convention.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. Because there are bad movies that are so bad they're good, and then there are bad movies that are just bad.
Certainly,
there's a big difference.
So okay, so we digress. So let's get a little bit back on topic here a little bit. So let's talk some encounters in this module. So again, as you guys know, Rick and I, we always do like a top 5. So we were thinking we were just automatically going to do a top 5 encounters on this one, and some of the problems with that right off the bat are, obviously that final boss battle encounter is going to be number 1, because that is such a, for the time, that is probably one of the best well-designed encounters that TSR probably put out, especially when you think about when this was published. That encounter has everything. We're going to go over it in a second. So that would have been both. And
we both mentioned that encounter in a different show when we talked about our top encounters from any module. I think we both had that on our list.
We did, yeah.
So that says something,
It does, and we'll get into that. But I think the first thing, like you said, I think you summed it up great. This module is essentially, you've got the wilderness part, and then you've got the collection of caves. When you get to the caves part, it is really just a bunch of caves. But where is it different than B2 or D1, D2? And I think that's where it really comes into environment, where Gygax played around with, he had the underwater rivers and the lake. There was some elevation stuff going on there. You had the labyrinth, which is cool. You had teleporters teleporting you around. So it kind of took it to the next level. I would say it did it a little bit better, and it was certainly always an inspiration for me. When I looked at things, I said, how could you make B2 better? How could you make the Caves of Chaos better? And it's like, well, add more water, probably, because there's very little water in those. Maybe add some elevation, maybe mix it up and really get the environment to sing. And almost make that be an adversary. I think, we talked about how one of the adversaries in this module was just finding the front door. And I think so I think that was the first thing that I kind of, when I was doing my review of all the different encounters, that I kind of came across.
No, I agree. I mean, again, I love the design of that first. I love the design of both levels, and again, certainly cave-like. But the weird kind of symmetry to the greater caverns, around the spherical area is very cool. And the upper is great. because it's very hard to find the cave with the stairs down.
Yep.
And if you look at that upper map, Gygax actually provides a few ways to get there. That basically, if the characters do not kind of cross the river at one point, they can sail down the river and kind of disembark. And if you look, it's actually very cleverly laid out. So yeah, I think absolutely solid maps, unless you have something, a problem with the underground. And yeah, I mean, going into that, we might as well go into that center area a little bit in detail if we can do without repeating ourselves. I first like the fact that you have to circumscribe this chamber. They don't just let you walk in. There's all these different approaches. And if we could put up the map of the caves again, it's kind of like, you have all these different entry points. And I think, if I recall right, the way it worked was if you opened up the doors to get in, the first time you would open up one of these sets of doors, it would teleport you back to one of the square areas. And they were like letter designations, so if you open the A doors, it would teleport you. And basically you had to open all the doors. You had to go all the way around this thing, and then when you open the last set of doors, it finally let you in. And I remember even years ago in a seminar at Gen Con, speaking about these great doors that just entered the place, because they're described as just, the picture is great, the illustration's super cool, and it's a real sense of something grand. It was a good tap on the shoulder for me as a DM, that instead of just having yet another wooden door and the characters open it, when you give them a door like this entering, they know they're going to someplace special. And then Gygax goes on to describe this hallway of red veined marble and this weird unearthly glow from the ceiling. And I think there's like a black, almost like a red carpet, except it's black, kind of leading down. And it's given the central chamber's occupant, it kind of makes sense, all these different, some of the color schemes. But it's just such a weird, creepy vibe that you're walking down this black and red and glowing hallway. So, to me, it sets it up so wonderfully before you even get in the center area, because first off, it takes a lot of work to open the doors. And then you have these wonderful doors with this very obscure kind of warning text on the doors, kind of warding you away, like a very, Egyptian curse kind of thing, telling you, if you open these doors, woe is you. And then if you continue past that, you get this really cool hallway, of red marble before you even get to the center. And the center area is just so unique. It could have just been a square room,
Yeah.
with the final creature laying there. And instead you got this just wonderful sphere with these screens and these kind of ledges. And you're told there's no even way down. It's basically told like you've got to either kind of climb or fly, I think, or just slide down the sides.
There's nowhere to stand. There's nowhere to stand outside of the ledges or down on the actual platform
it's
where
just
the vampire is.
I think that's one of the things that some of these old modules really had, is they had this sense of that wonderful grand final room where you felt you were, someplace totally different. It had a feeling of climax about it, that it was someplace, different. You weren't just in yet another big room. It wasn't just yet another 20 by 30 foot room with stone walls and wooden doors. It was something special. To me, that goes a long way toward making a character, having a good opponent creature is certainly key. But if you can put all this description getting to it, to me, that's like half the, that's half the battle of making a really good climactic encounter. And this does it so well.
Yeah. And what I love about this encounter is several things. Yes, that spherical inside of a sphere, which again provides a challenge. How are you going to even stand and engage in this NPC? And it's very much an NPC. In the very, I love the tactics. This was probably the first time I've seen NPC detailed tactics, what this character is going to do. Based on her equipment and her abilities. She got slippers of spider climb back in the day before vampires could spider climb automatically, where she could run along the edges and she was not inhibited by the spherical nature of the room, whereas the PCs were. So that was a huge advantage. She had a wonderful magical sword. She feigned the appearance of a captive paladin or whatever in the beginning and tried to charm everybody first. I mean, theoretically, if she, they fail their saving throws, the encounter could be over. She could charm everybody right off the bat. So that and the detail on those tactics and the
Mhm.
detail on her, the
Yeah.
equipment that she carries, how she
Yeah.
uses it, it just completed that picture. Like you said, the artwork and the description set the stage.
Yeah.
That all kind of was the next piece, and then I think the last piece, which was amazing, was the detail on the treasure
Yes.
in that
Yeah.
room. Oh,
Yeah.
just the detail of the silken coverings and
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
carpets and
Yeah.
and the gems and jewels, and then the artifact, and it
Mhm.
just amazing. Just the detail, and that encounter was like 2 pages long and full
Yeah.
color, full page artwork on it. It just
The pictures were completely on point to me. The pictures
yep,
were obviously carefully matched to the descriptions, the
yes.
artist took care.
And helped
Eh,
out to get you to understand that it was
yeah,
a sphere,
because
because
I don't think I would have understood that
probably
room, and
not. Yeah.
and the description also contains little clues. Because and I'm going
Yes.
strictly by years old memory here, but I seem to remember, like, them talking about her red lips and kind of alabaster-like skin.
Yep.
You're given hints to her true nature in the text. It's there,
Yeah.
it's very subtle. It's more like a, "Oh, yeah," when you find out later
Yep.
kind of
Yep.
clue, but, you're given that information. So it's just, talk about a great encounter where all the pieces work.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
no, I think this module would have fallen far more flat if the last encounter would have just been a big cave with a bunch of creatures, or a bunch of
Yeah.
demons in it. It wouldn't have
Mhm.
worked. To me, that final piece really made this sing. And again, all the elements together. When I look at the wonderful added value you get from the monster book and the spells, when I look at the great lanthorn, that you have as a treasure, when you think of this final room, when you get these cool maps, when you get all this wilderness information, to me, that's one of the reasons I personally really like this module. It's one of my favorite, probably one of my top 10 to be sure,
Mhm.
um, because it's just all the pieces, work so well together. And like you
I
said, the treasure
agree.
detail is just, and I like the fact that they gave you a lot of books actually as part of the treasure,
Mhm.
instead of
Mhm.
just giving you like, oh, here's some weapons. You didn't usually see more than one magical text as the kind of where a prime, a good segment of the treasure was magic text, and I thought
Mhm.
that was interesting. And again, there was an illustration that showed you how these books were kind of inserted, next to the coffin within this kind of
Mhm.
sarcophagi, and again, the illustrations are on point. It helps you understand how it all works,
Yeah.
as a DM. So it's just great, great detail.
Yeah. So, before we get to our top list, I just want to talk a little bit about the Labyrinth Encounter, which I
Mm,
always thought was fascinating. So, this is an important part of, when you're designing something. One of the things you could run into is if you're doing an orc lair, is another room of orcs, another room of orcs, another room of orcs, and this was kind of similar as another room cave, another cave, piercers in this one, and dragon in this one or whatever. But so there was this other area where you were teleported away
mhm.
from the dungeon essentially, and there was I think it was four. Yeah, there was four sub areas that you could go to, and
Yeah.
actually as you went through the portal, I believe it was, you rolled a die for it. It's like the characters could go to different,
Mhm.
you split them up and they can go to completely different areas, and they weren't all they were strange. You had the one was just your classic Minotaur maze. You had
Yeah.
the one that was the canyon with the centaur stuck, and it was very puzzly, kind of how to
Yeah.
figure out how to get the centaurs out of the box
Mhm.
canyon. And then there was the weird levitating. You were stuck in a magical circle, and you had to levitate your way
Oh,
up
that's
to the
right.
ceiling.
And then you had
Yeah,
the suits of armor, right? Remember
and then
the
there was the suits of
helmet?
armor. That one was like really, really short. It was basically like the suits
Yeah.
of armor, and you had to like defeat the suit of armor and put the helmet on, and there was only three of them.
Yeah.
And if there was more than three PCs, you had to, after the third person teleported off, like three more suits of animated armor came. And
Yeah.
by that point, there was probably only one or two PCs, if that, in the
Yeah.
room. So that was kind of that was kind of like a rude awakening, if you will. But and that was almost a little, I almost thought he was going to go a little sci-fi there with the suits of armor. It almost sounded like it was going to be a little bit of Android kind of thing or whatever. But then it went animated suits of armor and no ray guns or anything like that. But it was fascinating. It was I think a perfect time for a change of pace, which I
Yeah.
think is very important when you are designing. And you just not you just after a while you just get tired of room after room after room the same, and mixing it up. And the one place was like in a Greek mythology world, and just kind of making it a completely different thing. And I remember when we were designing Castle White Rock, we really looked to do that, where we wanted the
Yeah.
levels to kind of be different. We wanted, you know, we
Yeah.
had the token fire level, and then we had an enchanted garden where you can be transported off to the enchanted
Mhm.
wood, and you know, so we're mixing up, so it wasn't just cave after orc after orc.
Yeah.
There was enough of that too, you know, that was there as well, but definitely mixing it up and keeping it fresh. So thought that was very, very important. So shall we get to our top
We
five
get to?
list?
Yeah, why not? Let's do
All
it.
right, yeah, because this is fun. This is, like I said, this was definitely the meat of this you know of this module, getting that whole second book and having all
Oh
those
yeah.
beastly monsters in there. So do you
Yeah.
want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
Go ahead. I'll take a chance. Yeah, why don't you go
Okay,
first?
I will go first. See how many. What's the over under on the number of times we're going to cross over
All
here?
right, we'll see. Well, there's one I think we'll cross over for sure, but we'll see.
Probably, I think one too. We'll see how it goes. So, all right, my number five top
Did you
monster
have
that
an
was.
honorable mention before
I
you?
do have. I have several honorable mentions.
All right,
I
because
guess
I've
I
got
can.
an honorable mention.
Okay, yeah, a couple of my honorable mentions. Always fascinated with the Valley Elves. Actually, I always thought
Mhm.
that's kind of interesting. Very specific to the world of Greyhawk. Obviously, the Valley Elves and the Kushi together,
Mhm.
the Elven dog. I always were very fascinated by them. That there could kind of be a subspecies of wood elves, and they're really kind of, you know, uptight, and they were kind of, it was more of more of a role playing opportunity there than
Mhm.
obviously something that you could defeat. But I always loved those. And the Gorgamira was my other honorable mention. The mixture of, see if I get this right, a Gorgon, a red dragon, and a lion, I think it was.
Mhm.
You know, obviously based off of the Chimera,
Yeah.
but different. And I think
Mhm.
you're going to see a lot of that. We're going to talk probably a lot about that, about how a classic monster was just twisted around a little bit, and
Yeah.
kind of Gygax again showing you, giving you that blueprint of, you can take something that everybody knows
Mhm.
and loves and just give
Yeah.
it a little bit of a spin, and then you're going to
Yeah.
get something completely different,
Yeah. A little bit of hybrid
your player's going
action.
to love it. Yeah.
And and that's a good honorable mention because it's even in the wilderness area when he describes the, like, I think the Paralanders and some of the,
Mm-hmm.
and in the usual Gygaxian excruciating detail with who's wearing what and who's using
Yep.
what weapon.
Yep.
If you played in the world of Greyhawk, it was useful because you were getting some of these kind of, different areas. You were seeing what their, like, parties might look like when they
Yeah.
were out.
Exactly. Exactly.
To me, and I did play in Greyhawk at the time, so it
Oh, I
was,
did too.
that was like super useful. My honorable mention, and they frankly could have easily been higher, were the Demon Princes, Gratz and
Yep.
Frazer Blue,
Mm-hmm.
because they're not just two demons, but I thought both demons were really interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
and frankly, since this module, certainly Gratz, especially, they really took off, and so many other authors came in and kind of heaped yet more detail.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, like, we hadn't had a really, like a demon prince of, like, deception, like a kind of Loki of demon princes, if you will. We
Mm-hmm.
really hadn't experienced that at this point, unless you were just going to take Asmodeus or somebody and play him that way. Take an existing demon or devil. You didn't really have a demon that was dedicated, really. They made it very clear, like, he has this incredible strength, but he likes to trick people.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
and then, later on too, this whole story, deep history with Grass and Igwilv, and this whole thing going on with all these different NPCs and demon princes, and Yuz is involved, and if you know the history of a Yuz, there's origins of a Yuz mixed up in that. So a lot of deep Greyhawk lore in there.
Mm-hmm.
So my honorable mention would be the two demon princes. There's several mentioned in this book, but those two specifically, because I think they're both great, unique demon princes that later just got better, because authors took them and ran with them a little bit and just
Yep.
made them deeper. So those are my honorable mentions.
All right. So jumping into my top five, my number five favorite, I guess we would call it, monster from that was introduced in this book was the Cave Moire. And I'm pretty sure
Mm.
you're not going to see this. And this again, this kind of reaches back to my aquatic background and
Hmm.
everything. But I was fascinated by, you could take something like a moray eel,
Hmm.
very common, and they're actually quite large in
Hmm.
in our real world,
Hmm.
but make it bigger and put it in a cave, and then give it some really cool, crazy kind of rules and everything. Like they would obviously lunge out of their little crevasse, but you know they would only attack once every other round because they would have to like coil and lunge, and then they have to pull
Mm.
themselves back in, and get ready for another one. But they surprised you 1 out of 5, which is absurd. That's an absurd. I mean, when you only rolled a 6-sided die for surprise back then, so it's like they basically always surprised you.
Mhm.
And they had different ACs for their head and their body. And then it's like, and then Gygax even put a little rule in there. You have to read all the way to the end, but if you try to attack it, you only had a 1 in 20 chance of hitting the soft side of its body. You almost always hit its head, and that's where its AC was better. It was just amazing. I love that, and I've used
I love
them several times. I used them in Castle White Rock. I used them in Beneath the Keep FEF 14. I just always love them, and they're just that perfect little, you know, probably in third edition, the evolution of the choker probably was like, hey, we need something that lives in a crevasse,
Yeah.
that could reach out and, you know, but use its environment to kind of protect itself, but could pull something in or whatever. And I
Yeah.
think they filled that niche perfectly,
Yeah.
and that was my go-to for that in that
That's a good
regard.
pick. And it sounds like such a natural thing. As soon as you say Cave
Does.
Moire, it just sounds like, and yeah, that's not on my, it's not on my list of 5 or whatever, but
Mhm.
I do appreciate them. And this is even coming. I was in real life, I was actually attacked by a moray once while diving. So
Wow, wow,
I
that's
have a
awesome. Oh
storied
wow.
history with morays,
Yeah.
um, in the U.S. Virgin Islands. But well, the experience I can honestly say is one of the, you know, my experiences that I will never forget. But yeah, I do have an appreciation for the Cave Moire. All right, rolling on to my number 5, and this is one of the hybrids I threw in there. Is the Dragolisk. I just think
Mhm.
it's the coolest of the hybrids. Most of the hybrids didn't get a lot of play. You didn't really see them appear too much in future products or get a lot more detail. But in this case, I thought it was just such a nice, insidious combination of creatures. Talk about making you know, a bad guy worse. To just to combine the black dragon and a basilisk, and
Mhm.
you know, go into that kind of just what a fearsome opponent. So for that reason alone, just because it's just such a cool place to go and take both creatures and make something the greater, you know, the greater than the sum of the two. So it's that's the one half breed I let sneak onto my list, was the Dragolisk.
Another classic example of Gygax just twisting things around a little bit
Mhm.
and making something completely different and
Yeah,
keeping his players off. And you know
yeah,
that's why he was doing it. He was
yeah.
keeping his players off guard. That's, you know, the evolution of the Rust Monster was that the Rust Monster, I believe, in first edition didn't even have a bite attack. It was there to rust your equipment. And I'm sure that, you know, the first time one of Gygax's players encountered a rust monster, they ran right up to that thing and they're like, oh, he doesn't even look like he's
Sure.
got a big mouth or anything. And then they found out,
Yeah,
oh boy, this is a problem.
yeah.
So fascinating with that. So great. That's an awesome number 5. You know, it's interesting to see if that one pops up on my list. My number 4. So again, you know, very inspired by the classic monsters on this. I went with a category of creatures, the deadly puddings.
Mm.
So obviously you had the black pudding in
Hmm.
D&D. You could make the argument that the black pudding is right up there with the beholder and the red
Hmm.
dragon
Yep.
and the orc. And the orc was Tolkien, so you know black pudding was not Tolkien.
Yeah.
You know, red dragon was kind of Tolkien also, but the black pudding and the rust monster and, you know, some of the things like the roper and that were just these classic D&D monsters.
Yeah.
And, you know, then to get, you know, the deadly pudding, and all of a sudden like your whole pudding world opens up of wow, you can have any kind of pudding
Yeah.
really. And you know, and so you got your brown pudding, which was your
Mhm.
swamp variety, and your dun pudding, which was in deserts,
Mhm.
and then your, I think it was just the white pudding, which was the one in the Arctic areas and
Yeah.
that. So I think that was again, and again, that's just that little bit of Gygax saying,
Mhm.
I'm going to give you some ideas to run with. And
Yeah.
then who else didn't create other puddings? I
Yeah.
mean, I just created one literally 2 weeks ago for Crypt of the Devil Lich, where I created another new pudding because I'm like, you
Mhm.
could never have enough puddings. It's just, it's classic.
Yeah.
And It just really strikes a chord. And then just seeing that and seeing that you can have others and you can just take one idea and just go off of it.
Mhm.
I love that. You know,
Yeah.
it's what inspired me to design adventures.
Mhm.
Just seeing that and saying, I love that idea, and I've kind of grabbed onto that over it. Everybody who looks at some of my stuff, you'll say, oh, I know where that's from. I remember that exactly. Um, so that's my number four, the deadly puddings, brown, dun, and white.
Nice. And judging from our comments, our at least one viewer had a recent experience with a pudding as well, in their game. So
Yeah,
see,
just
good,
last
good
Friday night.
classic
Yep.
creature. Good
pu-
classic creature.
Puddings are black pudding
Yeah.
is right up there, man.
All right. My number four is, and this, I'm not a big giant guy, but I went with and I'm going to mispronounce this. I went with the Formorian, I can't say
Oh,
it,
okay.
giants. Um, just almost strictly on description, because the idea of these guys being, you're given great detail about them being deformed and having,
Hmm.
small arms or this or that, or an off appendage, and they're just described as being the wickedest of giant kind, kind of thing. And again, a creature that a lot of the creatures in this book later kind of took a life of their own, and extra detail was
Hmm.
kind of given to them, because I think later they were kind of given like an evil eye attack and things that I don't believe were in this book. um but yeah, I just thought, eh, just when I thought, like you said with the puddings, just when I thought, we had enough giants, now all of a sudden you're given this just deliciously evil giant, that you could kind of just see these guys as being so evil that the characters would have no compunction about fighting them or slaying them, and there's no ambiguity, no stone giant or storm giant nature of, oh, is it good or bad. These guys were just ruthlessly evil.
Hmm.
And again, just based on that description, I just, and they're even given like senses, because they have misplaced the eyes and ears, and Gygax goes into that detail of saying that I think they were harder to surprise because of their misplaced eyes around their head, or they had an eye, here, or this, overshaped ears and this kind of. So he didn't just make them ugly and kind of, but he took that description and almost made it to their benefit. Um, so for those reasons, that's my number four, is the Fomorian Giants.
Yeah, great, excellent. That's a good one. It's a solid one. My number three, this is again very based off of a very classic monster, right up there with the black pudding, the olive slime and the olive creature.
Hmm.
You're based very similar to the green slime, but by this
Mhm,
point, Gygax's group probably had run into lots of green slimes already.
mhm.
So he's got to mix it up and he's got to do something different. And this was fascinating. So this was again, it had an attack like a green slime. It dropped on you, but it didn't do any damage or anything. It dropped on you and it had this numbing paralytic poison, that you wouldn't feel it. You wouldn't
Hmm.
feel it dropping on you. And if somebody didn't see it, and he made it, in the description, he went into some pretty detail about, you got to have good lighting and da da da. It would crawl underneath your armor, and it would start taking over your mind. And then,
Ooh.
after a turn, if you didn't know about it, like it would start taking over your mind, and you would actually start hiding it from somebody. And basically, the slime would turn you into it would metamorphosize you into a slime creature, and it's what he
Yeah.
used to call it, the olive slime creature, where you were still kind of like a creature, but you were a slime.
Mhm.
And then you could talk to other slime creatures with telepathy. So there could be a whole, theoretically, an entire party of adventurers could get. I never did it, but this is why I thought was like, oh, there should be a whole party of adventurers, and they fall prey to it, and now you have to battle them basically in slime form. And that'd be really cool, especially if you'd run into those NPCs in town like before or
Mhm.
something, and they left for the dungeon, a week or two before you went to. But again, I liked them because it was complicated. It was not your standard monster. There
Mhm.
was some crazy rules, and there was that numbing thing, and it was like, you had to, you probably had to have a little bit of cachet as a game master to pull that off, and to give them enough chance to maybe discover it, but not and to ruin the encounter. So and fascinating, they weren't even featured in the module. I mean,
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
not there at all. It was just basically included there. And I used to remember fascinated by that,
Yeah.
the complicated nature of them, and loving them, and
Mhm.
and wanting to use them. So that was my number
Yeah,
three, the
definitely
olive
more than
slime,
a
olive creature.
yeah, definitely more than a slime. And I always loved monsters that had sort of like puppet creatures, or that would
Mm-hmm. The
affect.
musk
I,
creeper.
I think it's
Yep.
why I love the yellow musk creeper so much.
Yep.
Is that there was a certain creepiness about that, you know, the idea of a plant or a slime sort of invading you, that whole,
Hmm.
you know, maybe it taps into that whole body invasion
Yeah, yeah.
thing, because, you know, even in one of my fifth edition fantasy products, I tapped into sort of like a bodily invasion thing with a, you know, with a particularly nasty vine that was, you know, in no small part inspired a little bit by the ruin and some other, you know, works of horror, because yeah, it's just it's a nasty place to go for a creature, but it, like you said, it's so interesting. It takes it to a completely interesting direction. So yeah, that's a cool choice.
And those of you guys in the chat playing along, I mean, if you guys have a favorite monster from the from S4, throw it in
Yeah,
there. We'd like
throw
to
it
hear it
out
too.
there.
So yeah, throw it out there.
Yeah.
We'll make fun of it. So go
Yeah.
for it. So
um, what was my, all right, what are we on? Number three.
number three for you. Sorry about that.
My number three, and again, I tend to like the evil creatures and not go for the good or the neutral creatures, etc. But my number three, and I'm going to pronounce it my way, is the peach. I thought they were just a cool little neutral creature. We're given all these underdark type creatures or underground creatures, but at this point, with the exception of maybe the deep gnomes, most of them were evil. And
Hmm.
I thought these guys were just, I don't know, maybe some people found them boring, but I thought they were cool. And then they're given some very interesting stone abilities and things that
Hmm.
go with them. And even the little encounter where they kind of throw them in this module where you kind of interrupt them and they're, you know, they're kind of like, how's that light, stupid? You know, kind
Hmm.
of thing. It's cool because they don't necessarily want to help you. They're just doing their thing, you know, they're just, it's like nature. They're just kind of, they're doing what they do best, you know, is they're just carving out areas and they're kind of going about their business, and you've intruded into their area and it's played in that way. And I thought that was a very amusing encounter. So it's kind of like you're given this cool creature, and then right in the module, they it's one of the few that they do put in the module, and they kind of, you know, show you what to do with it.
Hmm.
Um, so I just thought they were cool because, again, for that, what you cite as breaking up the monotony, it's just a nice little neutral kind of creature that if you have characters that are exploring, you know, underground and they're running into, you know, Drome and troglodytes and all these horrors underground, here's something you can do to mix things up a little bit. Is all of a sudden you can, you know, break up things a little bit by having them run into a group of peach doing something, and maybe, you know, maybe they'll ally with the characters, maybe they won't, maybe they'll provide some information. You know, there's a lot of places you can go there. um, so I just thought they were a cool, it's easy to throw in races to me, a la the Fiend Folio, where you just say, well, here's another underground humanoid, and you don't give us any
Hmm.
detail. And it's kind of like the original Dire Kirby or some of these things where it just was yet another humanoid that looked a little different than a troglodyte, but had no personality, where I felt like the peach is one of those creatures that did have personality. So
Hmm.
for that reason, they're my number three.
Cool. All right. Excellent choice. Excellent choice. My number two, the Elu Demon. I had to get a demon on this list. I actually had a
Mm,
couple of options. You know, it was actually a little difficult, but I went with the Elu Demon. So these are the spawn of Succubi and humans. And I love them that they were more NPC like
mhm.
than absolute like monster. I mean, you could certainly kick their butt. They would probably kick your butt first. But there was little rules in there on how you could generate their stats. He actually encouraged you to generate all 6 stats for them, and I thought that was kind of novel.
Yeah,
That was back in
yeah.
first edition. That was novel. And they had some pretty good ways to do stats. I was like, wow, I wish I could create stats with a die 8 plus 10.
Yeah.
Would be kind of neat. So they were very PC like. They obviously
Mhm.
were they had magic items and they had equipment and whatnot. Most of them were spellcasters. Again, I like them that they were complicated. They you know, underutilized probably. They had a touch where they could touch you and do damage, and then they actually healed themselves, part of that. So which I thought was very fascinating, very vampire like, obviously.
Mhm.
But I always thought them to be fascinating. Obviously they were used in Temple of Elemental Evil.
Mhm.
Darley, the one NPC that's
Yep.
wandering around on the in the nodes,
Mhm.
and perfect use of her, by the way, too. You know, evil, not necessarily someone you're going to defeat, though. You might
Mhm.
actually want to work
Yeah.
with this person, at least for a
Yeah.
while, for the common good and everything. And that's
Yeah.
exactly the way they should be used.
Yeah.
And in the awesome, I'm a huge fan of the Night Below
Mm.
box set. There is an Elu Fiend in there that's allied with a Merilith and a Succubi. So they've been used. I love
Mhm.
them. They're just versatile.
Yeah,
And you can do a lot with it.
yeah,
They could just be your big bad and
yeah,
it'd be a fight, or it could be this really interesting little alignment kind of tweak, like,
yeah,
do I work with this NPC or not, or
yeah.
something. So
And that's
that's
the
my
best
number
word
two.
for them is flexible. It's kind of like
Yes.
they're like the Cambion in that sense is you could very much play them as evil with a small e,
Yep.
or you can really kind of have them be like the big bad NPC kind of
Yep.
driving the show.
Very much, very much so. That's my number two, the Elu
Nice.
Demon. Or if we're
Interesting.
talking about it these days, it's the Elu Fiend.
Yeah. Interesting. I didn't think you were going to go there. Number two, wholly original creature, I guess, because I'm not aware of any mythology connections, is the Behir. I think they're wildly cool. I love, it's just, to me, it's an alternate, to going with a dragon or going something like that. And it's just different enough that between their kind of serpentine description and the multi-legs and Gygax had a way of sort of giving you almost just by naming one, almost offering you a naming convention for things, like in D1, he names a couple, I think it's D1, he names a couple bugbears. So you get this, like a lot of Z's and things in the bugbear names. And I remember the Behir, the first Behir he threw at us, it had like a name like Lud. It was like LLUDD or something. And ever since then, I remember trying to, name my Behirs, kind of give them names in that vein. And I've used Behirs a lot. Like my, players can tell you, like I'm happy to bring out my great big Behir figure and throw it on the table because I think they're so cool. And, and a shout out to the cover of this module because Aerolotus gave us such a super cool Behir picture with that as well. That, talk about a nice, memorable module cover. So, to me, just looking at that Earl Otis picture made me want to use that creature. So yeah, for just sheer cool originality, I like to be here as sort of dragon light for those situations.
Great. All right. So that was your number two. So my number
Number two.
one, we're gonna keep it along the same lines here. The Behir. I mean,
Ah,
I had to go with it again. It was on the cover. Actually, if Elena could pop up the cover image, that would be great. So we can show off that Errol Otis artwork.
yeah,
And one of the more tame Otis pieces, I might add, there's not a lot of craziness going on there. It's actually just
yeah,
kind of a mundane picture, but
pretty
a very good one.
straightforward. Yeah,
Yeah, just a really, really, really classic cover of the module and everything. And again, it's a classic monster that was not in the monster manual. And I think some people might have just assumed it's been around all the time. It
yeah,
really hasn't. Snake-like, crocodile-type head. Lightning breath, which is kind of like, oh wow, it's like you kind of run up with this thing, you're like, all right, you're just gonna
yeah,
think it's a big thing you're gonna fight, and then there comes the lightning. It could swallow you, it could constrict you, it kind of had
yeah,
everything,
yeah.
the
That's what I
talons and
mean. Lots
everything.
going on.
It could fold its legs and slither like a snake. So it was a lot of cool stuff it could do, and it was really lends itself to, like we were talking about, the environment
Mhm.
of stick that bad boy up onto a big stalactite or something like that,
Mm,
where it can just dangle down and attack the
yeah,
PCs, but they can't get to the rest of its body, and coil back and use its lightning really lends itself to really getting the PCs out of their comfort zone, and
yeah,
really bringing the environment, even if you're down in the Underdark or into a cave, of making a 3D environment. And that's what fascinates me about these creatures. So I think when we were talking about this originally, I knew this was going to be my number one right off the bat. I'm excited. Oh, no, I know where your number one is now. I was trying to think. I was like, wow, this wasn't. I kind of thought your number one is going to be the Bear too, but I
it
think I
was
know where you're
close.
going.
It
I think
was
I know where you're
close.
going.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
but
you
uh,
could
but
guess, but
it's just this monster just speaks S4. You know how you,
yeah,
like, obviously Acerak, speaks S1.
yep,
You go down the line when you're just like, oh, this module has the dragon and it has the
yeah,
red dragon in it. I think the first thing I think of, believe it or not, is the Behir as
mhm,
opposed to the vampire.
yeah.
It's probably because it's on the cover.
Well, again, yeah,
Um,
it's such a great cover, and it
yeah,
feels like a different creature. It
it
doesn't just
does.
feel like, oh, this is another dragon.
Yeah.
There's a world, to me at least, there's a world of difference between a Behir and a blue dragon, even though
Oh
they
yeah.
both have lightning breath. They really again, all those little details, like you said, about the serpentine and the legs and the travel like a snake, and you really and the pictures give the head a certain look, and it's kind of almost like a crocodilian kind of look to it, or a Spinosaurus. It's got that kind of elongated, people started drawing it with that elongated snout and horns, and it got its own kind of look where it's, to me, that's what I like. It's not just like, oh, we're just going to make a dragon offshoot. No, this really felt like a separate, completely, separate species kind of thing, nothing to do with the dragon. So I love that it was just its own thing. Solid number. Obviously I agree. So drum roll, please. We'll see if you guessed it, which I think you probably will. My number one is the Darrow.
Yes.
I love the Darrow. Love them, love them, love them. I just used them in my home campaign.
Yeah. Now, were they in this module though?
No, they were not in this module.
I didn't think so. Okay.
And again, hearkening to what I said about, and I hate to pick on the Fiend Folio, they didn't feel like, and they weren't given as much detail in this. Again, another creature that came to acquire more detail as they were written up in later, editions, a lot more detail. I've seen all kinds of third-party books now with Darrow offshoots and, Darrow savants and Darrow witches. And I've seen like 4 or 5 different monster books now with some kind of weird Darrow offshoots, because people, I guess I'm not the only one who likes Darrow. But yeah, they're just cool. And half of it is the illustration. And I'm having a brain lapse on the artist who did this wonderful Jim.
Is it Jim Holloway?
Jim Holloway.
Yep.
And while we're on the subject, and I'm sure we could do our own show just about artists, and obviously there are those big artists that everybody always mentions with, Sutherland and Trampier and the people who do the cover the hardcover books, but I always felt like Jim Holloway didn't get his credit really, because he has done so many wonderful illustrations, not just for Dungeons and Dragons, but like talk about West End Games, for instance, and then the man has done so many fabulous, illustrations, and he sold me with the Darrow illustrations in this book, that they just look like such mean little buggers, and they have this sort of blank eyes. And at this point, later on, they kind of were described as, having a trait of badness and sometimes being blind and these other attributes that they really didn't have those when they hit this module. It was interesting to me that as a creature, they really evolved, but the beautiful detail that was in this book about the Darrow that helped make them different is Gygax gave them that whole very specialized weapon set where they have all these hook fortures and these weapons that pull you off balance and yank you off your feet and knock you on your knees. And there's that one wonderful picture that we just put up where aside from the elevation differences, I think it's just so cool. The poor adventurers are sort of in the middle and these Darrow attacking them from above and below. And you see all these strands, pulling the adventurers to different directions. And it's just such a cool idea. So yeah, that's my number one, is the Darrow, I thought.
Excellent. All right. Well, that's great. That was awesome. So we had one crossover. I guess that was to be expected.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that was about the price for admission. And I will completely agree with you on the artwork. We didn't really talk about that, but the artwork in this module is fantastic, and you get a lot of it because of all the extra monsters. Most of them have their own artwork. Yeah. One of the things I did notice when I was going back through this, I noticed that a lot of the art, I think it was the one by Jim Holloway actually, featured the same PCs in different scenes and whatever. And that's something I've latched onto. And if people seen my books, I actually like to do that. Apparently artists don't like that. They want to show different characters and all that. But it was kind of cool to see the same characters in different action scenes kind of thing. And I thought that was kind of neat to see, and certainly has been an inspiration for me. And obviously the cover art is just, again, definitely one of my favorite of the Errol Otis pieces, without a doubt.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Great art.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are already at the end of an hour, a little bit over. So, Rick, what do you got to tell the folks about our next show?
All right. Looking at our next show, we will be coming back to you on May 2nd at 9 p.m.
Actually, that's today.
And what am I saying? May 2nd. All right, we're 3 weeks from today.
Actually, it's going to be 4 weeks from today. So it's actually going to be the 30th.
30th. I'm
So,
sorry. Oh, that's right. Actually, we're jumping because of, yes. All
because
right.
of
We're
Dungeon
running
Con
on a
Online.
special. See that? It doesn't take much to throw me off, folks. So,
It's the
but
shot.
I'm very excited about the subject matter because we're going to explore the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Talk about a book with a lot of stuff in it, and
Yes.
we're going to be delving into that and talking about the stuff we like, don't like, and everything else. What a glorious mess that first book was. So we're going to be exploring that in detail. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we will probably only be able to scratch the surface of that book
Yeah,
because there's a lot in there, but we're going
yeah,
to pick out some choice parts of it. And I think we'll just have some discussions on some interesting parts of it and how they, really contributed to the game or didn't contribute to the game, and fascinating. And I can't wait for that actually, because I'm really looking forward to diving in that. So, yes, so that's going to be a new date and a new time. Actually, that's 9 p.m. instead of
9
8
p.m.
p.m. because we
Yes.
have to accommodate the con
Yeah.
schedule that weekend. To mention that Dungeon Con Online, that is our celebration of all things 5e. That's going to be coming at you guys on the 28th of May, a little bit on Friday night, but most of it will be Saturday and Sunday, the 29th and the 30th. That
Yep.
is Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah.
But we will be coming at you. We'll
Again, on
be
the 30th.
live streaming a couple
Yeah.
times that week, where I think we're going to actually have another Temple of Elemental Evil show that weekend, and there's actually going to probably be a third show that's going to be 5e orientated that will probably premiere there, and it sounds like it might actually be an ongoing show, so you might want to check in for that. So but please join us on Sunday night. We'll be tired, but we'll be ready to go. And we're gonna dive, like you said, into the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Yes. So again, May 30th, folks.
Yes. So we're going to jump into the Pearls of Wisdom. And Rick, why don't you go first on the Pearls
Oh
of
boy.
Wisdom?
All right. I'm going to lift my pearl of wisdom as I usually do, inspired directly from this book. And that's to, how can I put this? Make the characters work for it a little bit, and that don't put them at the front door. Working from this book, one of the things this book did well is you had to work kind of to get to the dungeon. You had to do a bit of exploring, which I like. And then once you were in the dungeon, you still had to really work at it to find the lower level. And you kind of, it was an evolution. It was a journey to get to that final chamber. And that's my piece for the DMs is like, don't just make the wilderness something that you have to get out of the way to get to the dungeon. The wilderness can be interesting too. The journey to the dungeon could be interesting too. And there's tales to be had there as well. A lot of memorable encounters, NPCs, your occasional mad hermit, whatever you're going to throw in there. There's some fun stuff there. So it's something I have to remind myself even is try not to think of the in-between stuff as dead time when you're playing. Try to, put some spice into that. So all your time is good time at the table, and you're not, even as a DM, you don't get in that mindset of, I just want them to get to the dungeon. No, enjoy the travel, enjoy the journey. Let the players enjoy the journey. To me, that's what it's about. So that's my pearl of wisdom is to,
Great.
develop the travel as well as, the dungeon itself.
Well, my original Pearl Wisdom, I think, was going to be on using the environment in different ways, but I think I've used that one before, so I think I'm going to get away from the environment. But I think that's a very, a very good one as well. But so I would say it's taking something familiar and giving it that little twist that Gygax was so fond at. The Deadly
Yeah.
Puddings were a great example of that. The Gorgamira, the Dracolisk. This module, I think, really exudes that. Probably the first time when Gygax probably sat down and was like, you know what, I need to start tricking my players more. It's like they're starting to figure it out. By this point, Monster Manual has been out for a year or two. People think they know everything about the game, and you're not going to surprise them. So what do you got to do to surprise them? What do you got to do to, and again, it's not like you have to completely come up with something brand new, and some of the things were certainly brand new in here, but to take a concept, especially use that, almost using that advantage that the players think they have and twisting it on them. And especially like the Dracolisk, I mean, they're like, oh look, it's it's Black Dragon, whatever, and then the next thing you know, you're stoned. So so I think that's I think that's going to be my
Mhm.
takeaway for this episode, is to always look to keep your players on edge,
Yeah.
always look to do something different, even if it is just an orc, make it some kind of different orc. It's what I loved about third edition, how you can have an orc druid or an orc monk
Yeah.
or an
Yeah.
orc, rogue, or you didn't know, was the orc just an
Yeah.
orc warrior with one hit die, or was he a 15th level orc paladin? It's like that was fascinating, how it really opened up your imagination on what you could do. And I love that part, yet it was still, at the end of the day, it was still an orc.
Yeah.
So but
We
so that
like
would
to
be
have
one.
those known races, but you don't want your characters to just look and say, "Well, they're kobolds. We know we can beat these guys." You
Yeah.
always want there to be that element of the unknown.
Yes, without a doubt.
So
And
great,
yes, the
great.
Pearl of Wisdom, very much a Goodman Games tradition regarding monsters. I would agree with that in the chat
Yeah.
there. Very good. So, all right. So with that, we are going to wrap up another show. So thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
And we will see you guys on Dungeon Con Online weekend. I hope that you guys come check us out at Dungeon Con.
Please
We got a lot of
do.
cool things planned as usual.
Yeah.
If you like 5e, it's gonna be a great fun time. So everybody, be well, be safe, and we will see you in a couple of weeks.
Good night, folks.